Good afternoon and welcome to everyone, AmeriCorps and others. There are seats up here, so I invite you, if you're standing in the back and you're here for the dialogue, come on in and grab a seat. You're very welcome to join us up here. So again, welcome to the Unitarian Church of Montpelier. I am Joan Javier Duval, the minister of UCM. And we are so delighted to be partnering with AmeriCorps, AmeriCorps VYT, and all of the wonderful community organizations that are here for this day of service and for this community dialogue. Many of you were here earlier in the day for our community lunch. The Unitarian Church is one of 5 congregations in the area that provides a hot meal, a hot lunch on a weekday. And Monday just happens to be our day, so we were lucky enough to have folks come out and volunteer. And I heard that 132 meals were served, so thank you. I think that may be a record here. And thanks as well to Neki, who took all of our food and prepared it and brought back a wonderful meal that we could serve. Martin Luther King Jr. is known to have said, "An individual has not started living fully until they can rise above the narrow confines of individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of humanity. Every person must decide at some point whether they will walk in light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. This is the judgment. Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?" So today is a day that we honor a prophet and a public servant, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who would have been 87 years old this year. We honor his legacy by coming together in community today. Now, Martin Luther King, of course, is held up as a national hero for dedicating his life to the broader concerns of humanity. If Dr. King hadn't been killed 48 years ago, we would have heard his voice undoubtedly speak out against trickle-down economics. He would have been here to lend a prophetic voice and hand to welfare reform during the Clinton era. He would have been present to speak out against the war on drugs and the epidemic of mass incarceration. We, of course, lost an amazing prophet and visionary, but we are here to carry on his legacy. And on this day, we can't forget, I think, that Martin Luther King had a radical vision for America and a critical analysis of societal structures. He dedicated the last years of his life especially to fighting racism, poverty, and militarism. And he called on all of us to ask some really serious questions about how society is structured. In 1967, speaking to the Southern Christian Leadership Council, he said, "One day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question, you are raising questions about the economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy. And I'm simply saying that more and more we've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. We are called upon to help the discouraged beggars in life's marketplace. But one day we must come to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. It means that questions must be raised." So on this day, when we celebrate and honor the life and legacy of this great visionary, I think we too have to be question askers. We have to be willing not just to provide service and charity to others, although that certainly has its place, but we also have to commit ourselves to challenging those structures that perpetuate racism and poverty and violence in our culture. So I'm so glad that all of us are here today to share our thoughts and our ideas and our passions around these issues. What we have planned is really mostly conversation. We have a number of different community organizations that are here to lead us in some small group discussions. And I forgot my list of organizations, so someone will need to help me, but we have 5 different possibilities, issues that you will break out into different groups. Thank you. We have folks here representing these various organizations: the Community Justice Center, Justice for All, Capstone Community Action, Central Vermont Food Systems Council, the Northeast Organic Farming Association, Montpelier Food Pantry, and Rising Tide. Woo! Yes, right. They were a new addition. And the issues that we'll be focusing on are 1, restorative and criminal justice. Did I get that right? Is that Yvonne? Yes, great. And do we want folks to come up and introduce themselves? I'm looking at Laura. Yeah, so we'll have folks from these different organizations. If you could come up and quickly introduce yourself and give us a sense of what it is in your group, what the focus will be, what the discussion will be about, and that'll give everyone an idea of where they may want to go for the next 45 minutes to an hour. And after that small group discussions, we'll be coming back to share what came out of your group, how can we see connections amongst these different issues, and to really identify some concrete actions that we can take individually and as a community. And since Mark Hughes is right here, I'm going to call on you first since I see you. Mark Hughes from Justice for All will be leading the group focused on racial justice. Do you want to say anything more than that? 1 minute.
I do. I want to say
into the microphone. Thank you.
I want to say we were encouraged to find a quote from, well, first of all, good afternoon and thank you everyone for coming out today. I am Mark Hughes. I'm the co-founder of Justice for All. The other co-founder is Allyson, Sironi, and she's right over there, and she put me on the spot. That being said, we were encouraged to bring a quote, and the quote is, our quote is, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." So our session will be co-facilitating a session. What we'll be discussing is racial disparities in the criminal justice system in Vermont and what we as a community can do about them. Please join us.
There's a group that will be focused on economic justice. Thank you. Come on up.
Good afternoon. It's my privilege to be the Executive Director of Capstone Community Action. My name is Dan Hoxworth. Community action agencies were created in 1965 out of the war on poverty. So Dr. King gave his life willingly and knowingly to outlaw poverty. That was the subject of his final book, and that was why he was in Memphis working with and supporting the sanitation workers and knowing he was under death threats. And unfortunately, that was where he met his death. The quote I picked goes like this. This is from Dr. King. "Deeply woven in the fabric of our religious tradition is a conviction that we are souls of infinite metaphysical value. If we accept this as a moral fact, we cannot be content to see hunger, to see people victimized with ill health, when we have the means to help them. Rich and poor, we have entered the same mysterious gateway of human birth, into the same adventure of mortal life. The agony of the poor impoverishes the rich." Hope you will join me.
Yvonne, would you like to come up and tell us about the discussion on restorative and criminal justice? Did I get that right?
Hi, I'm Yvonne Byrd, the director of the Community Justice Center in Montpelier, one of the 20 community justice centers around the state. And actually, we're going to focus on restorative justice as an alternative and saner means of resolving criminal conflict, and one that works as opposed to our standard for many centuries of the criminal justice system. And in the spirit of others with their quotes, let me read one. There's some good in the worst of us and some evil in the best of us. When we discover this, we are less prone to hate our enemies.
I know Joseph and Kristen are here who are leading the food justice. Would one of you or both of you like to come up? Great.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kristen Andrews. I'm the executive director of Just Basics, we coordinate the Montpelier Food Pantry, the Meals on Wheels program, the congregational program at the Senior Center, and also a summer meals program for free summer meals for kids in the summer. And the discussion that Joseph and I would like to facilitate would be one of looking at how can we move from just food distribution to a more to a system of food justice. What is the difference between feeding people and making sure that everyone has access to food? And Joseph Kiefer, who is the vice president of our board of directors, is going to share a quote with you from Dr. King.
This is from I See the Promised Land. Let us rise up tonight with a great readiness. Let us stand with a great determination, and let us move in these powerful days, these days of challenge to make America what it ought to be. We have an opportunity to make America a better nation, and I want to thank God once more for allowing me, all of us, to be here together.
And our last minute entry, Rising Tide, will lead a small group on climate justice.
Thanks so much for having us here, and I'm honored to be a part of this discussion today. My name's E-Rock. I'm a volunteer with Rising Tide Vermont, which is a climate justice group that you've probably heard about mostly in fighting the frack gas pipeline in the western part of the state. Climate justice is a movement that seeks to address the root causes of the climate crisis, which are racism and capitalism, the same things, militarism, that King was talking about. And the quote that we chose comes from that last speech that he made to the sanitation strike and supporting communities in Memphis in 1968. And he says, "Now, let me say, as I move to my conclusion, that we've got to give ourselves to this struggle until the end. Nothing would be more tragic than to stop at this point in Memphis. We've got to see it through, and when we have our march, you need to be there. If it means leaving work, if it means leaving school, be there. Be concerned about your brother and your sister. You may not be on strike, but either we go up together or we go down together. Let us develop a kind of dangerous unselfishness."
So if you didn't arrive here to this dialogue already having some sense of what you might want to discuss, I hope something that was said captured your heart and your mind and is calling to you for discussion. This next part, as we move into our small groups, will just require some communal effort. And now we'll shift. We'll probably have to move chairs around. We'll be in our small groups for about a little under an hour, and then, like I said, we'll come back together to share and make connections with one another. Thank you again for being here. So I'll just have folks come up and share 1 to 2 minutes, main points of what came out of your discussion in your small group. So anyone want to volunteer to come up first? Or I'm going to have to start calling on people. Yeah, great. Yeah, just introduce yourself, let us know what group you were with, and what were the main points.
My name's E-Rock, and I was in the climate justice breakout group. And the quote that we were all circled up around is, from a sanitation strike, Memphis, Tennessee, in 1968, a speech called "I've Been to the Mountain." And King said, "Now, let me say, as I move to my conclusion, that we've got to give ourselves to this struggle until the end. Nothing would be more tragic than to stop at this point in Memphis. We've got to see it through. And when we have our march, you need to be there. If it means leaving work, if it means leaving school, be there. Be concerned about your sister." He said brother. But "you may not be on strike, but either we go up together or we go down together. Let us develop a kind of dangerous unselfishness." So we had a good, rich conversation that went everywhere from how can we build social relationships that are more based around cooperation and sharing, to share the resources that we have in terms of cars and how that could have an impact in terms of emissions and stuff. And then we started talking about, I brought up the Montgomery bus boycott and how people were carpooling, and that was used also as a tactical way to confront the system of oppression. And so we were kind of pulsating in and out of what are little things that we can do to change our lifestyle, and to have an impact as consumers and this and that, but also how do we affect these bigger systems, the economic system of capitalism, or these systems of racism that keep us divided and preference some while stealing from others. And we talked a bit about the People's Convention, which is going to be basically a bigger version of something like this, where there's all kinds of different membership groups that are focused around social justice, environmental justice, economic justice, migrant justice, coming together to talk about how do we have a just transition away from all these problems, away from this crisis. How do we have a transition that is guided by the principles of justice, where people get what they need and aren't exploiting one another. And there was other conversations, bits about education, connecting to nature, and it was a good one. So, if you're interested in the People's Convention, we've got flyers about it. It's going to be April 30th and May 1st, somewhere around central Vermont. So, thanks.
Another group want to come up and share?
Hi everyone, I'm Julia, serving with Salvation Farms up in Morrisville. I was with the food conversation. We started by introducing ourselves, and it was clear that we could go in a million different directions. So we tried to really frame the conversation around how the Montpelier food shelf can really become more accessible, less stigmatized, and kind of shifting from more simply just giving free food to those in need, to a really more dignified and kind of holistic communal experience. So we talked a lot at first about the stigma and the shame that can come with needing food or needing other resources, and how that can maybe be turned around to letting the receivers in these situations become the givers to give back to other populations in need as they're receiving themselves. And the shame really runs deep, especially regarding food and how to channel that energy into more of a productive emotion and feeling that can be beneficial for the community. The notion that there's enough time and food in this community, and shifting those resources, especially through gleaning. And we shared a lot of different initiatives that are happening that people can tap into, and connecting our service sites to other people trying to do this work, to make this food pantry in particular, kind of all of us learning, cooking, and eating together. So can there be more communal meals and gatherings like the one we just had that incorporates education, not just for those in need, but for all of us, because we all need to remember where our food comes from and how to eat well. And then we ended with really trying to affirm people's humanity and treating each other with dignity, and how to come together to do that together.
Hi, I'm Tess. We were in the discussion for economic justice, and we discussed a lot about homelessness and the lack of housing for homeless people, and this whole issue around it where there's this stigma towards homeless people, and there's kind of talking about like what is our responsibilities, and what should we be doing, how should we be doing it, and projects that are happening now. Like was it the government donated an old hotel building to use for shelter, and there's like a $2 fee
All the hotels in Vermont.
In Vermont, yeah, and that goes towards helping the homeless, and just the program's just for helping prevent people from becoming homeless, and learning about just how to help these people and educate people, and just this whole issue that's kind of not looked at a lot of the time, especially like someone mentioned here in Montpelier we send our homeless people to bury, and because we don't want to see it here, and we want to push it off on someone else, like, okay, yes, we have this issue, but it's someone else's job to deal with it, and how do we overcome that, and how do we start making changes to help these people. So
Looking for my petition. Somebody stole my petition. That's okay. We have another one. We can do it online as well. So we are the group that did the racial disparities in the criminal justice system. There was a group of about 8 of us or something like that. First of all, I just want to thank the group for participating. It was an outstanding group. Give it up for yourself. And I think generally speaking, I think that there was some discovery. What we started with is just talking about the disturbing statistics in terms of the demographic within the criminal justice system of African Americans that are being represented by 10% of the prison population in Vermont, where there's just 1% Vermont being African American. And we also talked about that at a national level, but what we wanted to try to get at is what we can do about stuff like this, and the fact that it's a very large and complex issue that came out, and that there are so many moving parts. And what we came down to is there's really 2 ways that we could go about doing so. One is obviously focusing on hearts and minds, because the first one being law, what we determined is obviously that could only go so far, right? So I think one example that we gave as things that would be important, because I think it was a little appalling to come to terms with the fact that those folks across the country in many states who are convicted felons cannot vote. So that kind of adds a whole new light on what it is that we're talking about. But we talked about ban the box. Fortunately, Vermont is not one of those states. We can give it up for ourselves, right? One of the big things was developing a curriculum. We talked about how do we go about informing people who are like-minded, and how can we create a package of information that would be useful, that would be helpful in informing them. And I think really the key here is knowledge. It's about understanding what's actually going on inside of the system. It's about understanding the true reality of the statistics that I just rattled off a minute ago, and understanding the impact, and understanding what's happening and what's not happening inside our apparatus. So how do we do that with churches and schools? There's a huge history, or as Jared said, his story, I said that, conversation that happened. We talked a little bit about VIA's activities on that as well, about some of the things that are going on, and also the existence of online implicit tests. How many of you are familiar with those, the online implicit testing? Well, get familiar with that, okay? Okay. And we also talked about, a really good example was the doll test, the baby doll test, where there's one white doll and one black doll. So we talked a little bit about that, but we came full circle in our discussion, oddly, and it was just by coincidence, when someone said, hey, actually, we need white allies. And it occurred to me that, hey, that's what we started talking about in the first place, because an injustice anywhere is, injustice everywhere. It affects all of us. So, yeah, just understanding that there's just a huge impact. Actually, I don't even know how to go into expressing the extent to which injustices within the criminal justice system impact us societally and transgenerationally. But I think we made a lot of progress in understanding that it's not just about the law, it's about hearts and minds. And particularly within the state of Vermont, it's important that we rely on our white allies to help get the work done. Thank you.
Okay. So I was in the Restorative Justice group, and we actually did an exercise to start out, where we had a ball of string, and we had to toss it to one another and tell a story about a time when we broke the law or did something we would consider immoral. And then once we shared our stories, we kind of took it back around to with the question of what if someone could have done something to stop us or to say something that would have helped us repair what had happened, what could that have been? And I think in all of our cases, if someone had talked to us or we had been able to talk with the person that we had hurt, we could have repaired those situations. So we also, after we had done this exercise and shared our stories, we kind of opened the discussion up, and one of the things we started to talk about was punishment, and is punishment necessary? Is it something we need to have? Is it like in some cases, or is it actually more harmful? So just kind of people continue to share stories about their experiences with that, and whether they felt it was beneficial or not. So just a pretty open discussion, and yeah, a pretty open and honest dialogue.
Great, thanks everyone. So as we start to move towards our close, one of the purposes of our gathering, besides being in community and having these conversations, is also to make connections between all these different issues and to see how they're interrelated. So maybe just take a minute to think about that. How is it that climate justice and food justice and economic justice and racial justice and restorative justice, how are all these things connected? And I'm going to invite you, again, to hold on to your paper for a minute. And just, someone next to you, just share, 30 seconds with a partner. What is the connection that you're making in your mind amongst these different issues? Does that make sense? So just take a moment, turn to a partner. How are these things connected? And introduce yourself. So you have a big Post-it note, and what we're going to ask you to do is think about the question, what is one thing you can do in the next year to bring forth justice in our community? What's one thing you can do that you can commit to, will commit to today? And take a moment to think about that, write it on the Post-it, and in the back of the room, we have up large flip chart papers with all of the different quotes that were used in the groups. We'll ask you to just put your Post-it somewhere on whatever quote is calling to you. And then we can also take some time to just wander around and look at each other's commitments. We'll have a little MLK playing in the background for us to meditate on. And we'll see where it goes from there. I might say something to close us out. There's also a number of different groups here with tables, so you're invited to stay and linger and talk more and learn about different organizations. So I'm going to turn on this little clip, ask you to just reflect for a minute, write down your reflections, and whenever you're moved to wander around the room, get up and share your commitment so that other folks can see it.
At this time, I have the honor to present to you the moral leader of our nation. I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as the red beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a glorious daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize the shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. And the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. They were signing a promissory note with every American was to fall out. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check. A check which has come back marked insufficient funds.
AmeriCorps pitched the idea of today with Joan about a month ago, and she welcomed it and encouraged it from the start. And a big thank you to the Unitarian Church, their community, for allowing us to have this event today. Yeah. To Neki, helping prepare the delicious community lunch. And to the dedicated UU volunteers that set up this lunch every Monday. Thank you. And for the discussion side, we're so grateful for Yvonne from the Community Justice Center, Joseph and Misse and Kristen from CVSSC and NOFA and the Food Pantry, Mark and Allyson from Justice for All, and Dan from Capstone Community Action, who all came together to facilitate an important discussion on social justice issues. So, yeah. Thank you. And last but not least, we can't forget to thank the AmeriCorps members and local youth and individuals who all came together to serve and volunteer today. It was a really beautiful collaboration. Thank you.
In the words of Dr. King, power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. So I hope that you all go from here feeling energized to use your power to bring forth justice with love. Thank you.